Hi everyone, I'm Kyle Bechet, and this is the AAF Exchange, a podcast from the American Action Forum, where experts provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic policy issues. Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, a quick check-in on the economy and a look at the Federal Trade Commission's antitrust agenda. Joining us today is AAF's President, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, and AAF Analyst, Fred Ashton. Up first is, of course, Douglas Holtz-Eakin on the state of the economy. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, how have you been? It's been a while. It's been a couple of podcasts. We've put you on the bench for a little while.
Yeah, my feelings are deeply hurt, but it's nice to be back. Appreciate you having me. I've been good.
We should note before we start, as it's picking up again, we have some construction going on outside AAF today, so we're in a little bit of a loud zone, so we have to apologize to any listeners if there's any drilling in the background.
Road work. Thanks, Bidenomics.
Yeah. So, anyways, before we get into anything, why don't you tell us what's on your mind?
Well, I'm upset about economic injury disaster loans. EIDLs were invented in response to the pandemic, back when we had the Paycheck Protection Program and other things. They were loans by the Small Business Administration, not loans that would be turned into cash, not anything that could be misconstrued as anything other than a loan. They were 30 years, fixed rates, low fixed rates, about 3.75% and about $380 billion worth of these loans were made. And the Inspector General of the SBA and the Washington Post reported his findings that they had decided not to collect on any loan under $100,000. And so about $72 billion just being tossed. And I just can't understand this. These are now, the taxpayer liability. Someone has to pay. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to now come out of the taxpayer. And, there's no sending a bill to Congress and consulting. There's no running it through the appropriations process. The law was we're going to make a loan, we're going to collect on it, and they're not doing it. Mm-hmm. And so just like the student loan forgiveness and a lot of other credit machinations by this administration, I just think it's beyond the pale.
Yeah. So it's basically them just saying, it's basically just turning into a free grant, essentially.
No, I don't, and I don't know why. Now, we did have the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a loan that if you spent the proceeds on core expenses like payroll, rent, mortgages, things like that, 75% of it, then at the end of 2.5 months, the loan was forgiven, so it was essentially a cash grant. But that was the deal in advance. When you signed that, you knew the deal on this was you sign it, you have to pay it back. And they're just not collecting.
Interesting. All right. So as we talked about before, it's been a while since you've been on the podcast. So we haven't done a state of the economy in a while. So I wanted to, get you on and get your take on the state of the economy this week. So give us your rundown.
Well, I think you start with the GDP report, where the top line was, third quarter growth, 4.9%, big number. Everyone's sort of surprised by that and saying, gee, this economy is so incredibly strong. You look inside that number, it's not quite as great as you might think. 1.3 percentage points of that came from just inventory bounce. That's transitory and will go away. 0.8% came from government spending. So that's 2.1%. Only the remaining 2.8% is growth in private sector final demand. That's not a great number. It's a good, solid number. And that's incredibly unbalanced because non-residential fixed investment provided zero. So the business investment sector is flat. That's all being driven by the household. And while the household did spend money hand over fist, no question about it, it's dropped its savings rate by 2 full percentage points in the past 4 months. Credit card debt has ramped up quickly over the same period. So can that continue? Well, certainly you can't have one part of the economy going really fast and another part not moving at all. They got to come together at some point. So the issue is, will businesses pick up or will households come down? I think it's more likely to be the latter. So I remain cautious about the pace of economic growth going forward.
Yeah.
There's nothing else out there that looks like it's picking up either. Like, there's not signs of disaster, but we got the labor market data. ADP today, 113,000 jobs, much like last month, very solid, nothing spectacular. The job openings and labor turnover survey, every number is the same as last month. So it's just more the same in the rest of the economy. And that makes me think that this sort of household-led binge in the third quarter probably won't last.
Yeah, so I mean, it does seem like, I remember back during the pandemic that, credit card rates, or not credit card rates, but the amount of credit card debt people had was going down quite a bit, and people were staying at home. So what am I going to use this extra money on? Oh, I should pay down my credit card debt. Smart move.
Yes.
But now it seems like they're using that extra to continue this binge.
Yes.
The savings that have been built up, using that bit on this binge, just hoping to get through these past couple of months. And so at some point that has to come to an end.
I think it comes down to earth. I mean, I don't expect a precipitous fall, but the Federal Reserve has been noting that there will have to be a sustained period of sub-trend growth. That's good Fed speak for a really stagnant economy. That's how they're going to get inflation back all the way to 2%. Sub-trend growth can include negative growth, and that's the concern about a recession early next year. If you look around the forecasting world, about half the people have a mild recession in the first half of next year. They thought it would be the second half of this year, just pushed it off a little bit. I still think that's not a crazy outlook.
What about the Fed? I mean, what do you anticipate from them the rest of the year?
As we speak, they are deliberating. The announcement will come out at 2:00. They will hold rates exactly where they are. As I wrote in one of my pieces for the morning newsletter, the Fed really hasn't been that tight that long. People saw the big jump in the federal funds rate, 500 basis points. But adjusted for inflation, we didn't get into positive territory until this year. So we haven't had positive real rates for very long. And if you're borrowing at that 10-year, it's only been for a couple months. And so they are going to need to keep the real rates relatively high for a sustained period. That means they don't have to jack up the nominal rates anymore, but they have to keep them here. So this mantra of higher for longer means they stay where they are for longer than they might have thought.
Right. So what you're saying is tomorrow when this podcast goes out, we'll know what the Fed will do.
We'll know the Fed decided not to change rates.
Right.
And that will continue the tight monetary policy they have. And in the background, they'll continue to tighten by shrinking the balance sheet. They've been steadily doing that. Money's going to be scarcer, more expensive. And we'll see the implications.
Yeah, this is one of those moments where we need to record just 3 different answers here, and so that tomorrow, when we know
I'm not going to be wrong, Kyle. We don't need to record other answers.
Just as a backup, you always have that second speech written. You worked on campaigns, you know that no matter what, you have the lost speech written. You don't want to tempt fate. But anyways, the other thing we'll know later on this week is, of course, the October jobs numbers come out on Friday.
Yes.
Beyond the top lines, what are you watching for?
Well, I continue to stare at the labor demand component. What is the combination of number of employees, hours of work per employee, and average hourly earnings? That had started to come down earlier in the year. It bounced back up. I want to see that labor demand sort of settle somewhere in the 3 and 4% range. That's consistent with 2% inflation.
Interesting. Well, we'll leave the economics discussion there for now.
Okay.
Of course, tomorrow we'll be eagerly awaiting for your weekly economic tracker video that we'll put out, and where you'll talk about all the things we didn't get to today and all the reports we don't have yet.
Yes, and this is being done from a construction zone. Tomorrow's tracker will be done from the road. I'll be in Chicago, so
that's right. You are for the rest of the week. So we get a little break in. I mean, we will have to miss you in the office.
Yes, I can tell.
Before I let you go, though, we have to do your favorite part of the podcast, which is the trivia. So here it is. In 2020, the U.S. economy missed out on approximately how many million work hours because of severe mental illness-related non-participation?
This is from a paper by Isabella Hindley.
Correct.
And I'm going to say 250 million.
You're not that far off. It's 280 million.
Oh,
so I think
that's a winner.
I think we'll give you, we'll give you close to the pin on that one. It's one
I
of
saw
those,
it fall in the cup.
Yeah, it's not quite the eagle, but you still have the birdie opportunity from there.
All right.
But I mean, that's kind of astonishing that
is
there's that many people.
It is a big number.
Are out of work because of severe mental illness.
Yeah, it's a nice piece of research. We do a lot in the economics profession, sort of calculating the cost of chronic disease and how that keeps people from work. This is a comparable ailment in the economy, and certainly deserves the attention that it's now starting to get.
Yeah. So was this part of the whole looking for those missing workers that we were doing after the pandemic?
We started looking for the missing workers, and there were a bunch of wild cards. Right, we went through the usual suspects and didn't really find them. Then we started looking at the opioid epidemic. That's one thing. Long COVID's another possibility, and this was the third. Was it due to mental duress? There were a lot more reported cases of mental duress in the pandemic than had been prior. But when we finally sort of took the time to go look, we realized this has been a long-standing issue in the U.S.
All right. Well, Doug, thank you for joining us today. We're going to turn now to Fred to talk about some antitrust policy.
Great.
Next up is AAF expert Fred Ashton for an in-depth look at the FTC and its antitrust agenda. Fred, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kyle. Glad to be on.
Yeah, this is your first time in person in the studio. We did a great podcast a few months ago at this point on the PGA Live merger. So unfortunately, we don't get to talk golf today, but at least you're in the fun studio.
Yes,
room.
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I also won't pepper you with some golf questions that I have for my own personal golf game today.
Those are always welcome, Kyle.
Let's jump into it. Some of the biggest policy-related news in Washington is the Biden administration's myriad of antitrust cases that are out there. Could you start by just giving us a big picture view of the FTC and Justice Department's current antitrust agenda?
Absolutely, Kyle. We have an antitrust enforcement regime that is aggressive and anti-consumer. For the past 40 years, the agencies have prioritized consumer welfare in their antitrust jurisprudence. They would protect and ensure merger activity, other competition issues did not result in higher prices, reduced output, diminish innovation, or create lower quality products. But we've strayed from that under this administration. Back in July 2021, the Biden administration issued an executive order on competition in the U.S. economy and claimed that industries have become overly concentrated and that antitrust enforcement for the last 40 years has been a failed experiment. What we're left with now is our two antitrust enforcement regimes that are protecting competitors rather than consumers and punishing behavior the administration doesn't deem desirable.
Interesting. So you've written a lot about the FTC and DOJ's new merger guidelines. I mean, you have quite a bit of pieces out there, and if people want to look those up, they're all on your profile page on AAF's website. But walk us. Walk us through these changes and in the new, specifically in the new merger guidelines with the FTC and the DOJ. Walk us through the changes and your concerns there.
So we should start with the old guidelines from 2010 and the horizontal merger guidelines from 2010 and the vertical merger guidelines from 2020. Both focused and had a unifying theme of consumer welfare, again, to protect consumers from higher prices. This proposed new merger guideline, its goal is one thing, and that is to quash merger activity. They're written in a way where companies can be accused of several different types of behavior in a merger that would cause the antitrust agencies to file a lawsuit and challenge the merger's legality. But what's missing is a unifying principle. It is now a guideline focused again on protecting competitors rather than competition and consumers. and it could open doors to theories of harm that never existed and leave businesses really in a place where they shy away from engaging in merger activity.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it really seems like all of this, merger guidelines are basically around this mentality of big is bad. Like that's what it really comes down to with this administration, and they don't care if it's better for consumers at the end of the day. They just don't like the idea of too big.
Correct. This is the best representation of the administration's attitude towards merger activity and big is bad companies. That opens a lot of problems where large firms can acquire smaller ones to help bring products to market. We see that a lot in the pharmaceutical space, the technology space, and a lot of that innovative activity at the startup level is really threatened with these new guidelines.
Interesting. On a related note, you've written on agencies' proposed changes to the, let's see if I can get all three of these names. It's like saying a law firm at this point. Hart-Scott-Rodino Act. Walk us through these changes and what your concerns are.
So the HSR Act of 1976 established the pre-merger notification program, where companies engaging in mergers and acquisitions valued at $111 million or more would need to notify the agencies in advance of this merger. It really afforded the agencies time to assess the merger and determine whether or not there were any anti-competitive concerns. These HSR guidelines or proposed changes are very consistent with the merger guidelines. They are designed to quash merger activity. By the FTC's own estimate, there'll be a quadrupling of time required to provide this information, and $350 million additional dollars spent on lawyers and advisors for firms seeking to merge. It offers little for the agencies, and it's really a boon for antitrust lawyers more than anything. It does nothing to protect consumers from an anti-competitive merger.
Yeah, and which I mean, as you mentioned at the start, that used to be the guiding principle. Does this harm consumers, or is it good for consumers? And that, the consumer welfare standard, that's it, right? Standard. I mean, it just seems like throwing that out the window, just, that seems like it should be the guiding principle.
It should be, and with these HSR proposed changes, companies will shy away, and that can rob consumers of pro-competitive mergers that could help companies deliver new innovative products at lower prices.
Yeah, well, and speaking of lower prices, let's talk about some of the potential impacts that those FTC actions and others will have on the economy. So explain to us the impact on the economy and what policymakers could even do here. What's your take?
If you're anti-consumer, as the agencies have been for the last 2 years, you're risking prices increasing. You're risking reduced output. But unfortunately, we have seen members of Congress from both sides of the aisle embrace some of this. And it's because they are now able to weaponize antitrust enforcement to punish behavior they don't deem desirable. Rather than having that limited principle of the consumer welfare standard, it could be a free-for-all for lawmakers to push the agencies to pursue certain activities.
Wow, so we could see more of these as lawmakers start using it to, use the power of government to influence behaviors that they want to have happen. And at the same time, that just means for us consumers out there, we might see higher prices on anything from, I'm thinking of the Microsoft Blizzard merger, so you could see, certain Microsoft products be higher and things like that.
Absolutely.
Is that kind of what we're looking at?
And that's a great example of a pro-competitive merger. Same with Facebook and Within. Or Meta Within. It allows a product to be brought to market more quickly because of the scale of Meta.
Interesting. Well, Fred, thanks for joining us and talking about all of this. It's certainly something that I think we're going to see a lot more of in, if as we move forward. So I'm sure we'll have more and more cases to talk about.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Tune back in for our next episode, where our experts will provide clear, data-driven insights into today's economic and domestic issues. I'd also encourage you to check out any of the links in our show notes, and also follow us on social media to learn more about AAF. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play.